The Velanthari Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their ships moved through space like gods, and their word was law across 900 worlds. No species had ever said no to them. No species had ever dared. High Executor Vorath sat in his throne room on the capital world of Valanth Prime. He was old, even by the long-lived standards of his people. His blue skin had faded to pale gray, and his 4 eyes had seen the fall of countless civilizations. He had personally watched 37 species kneel before the Empire. Some had fought. Some had begged. All had submitted in the end. Today, he was dealing with a new species. A young one. They called themselves humans. "Show me their world," Vorath commanded. The holographic display activated, showing a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. It was unremarkable in every way. The humans had only been traveling between stars for 300 years. They had colonized a handful of worlds in their small corner of the galaxy. They had no great fleet, no powerful weapons, no history of conquest. "They are nothing," Vorath said. "Send them the standard message." His assistant bowed and transmitted the ultimatum that had been sent to every species the Empire had ever encountered. The message was simple. Join the Empire as a tributary state. Pay taxes. Provide soldiers. Obey all imperial laws. In return, they would be allowed to live. The alternative was destruction. Vorath expected the usual response. Fear, panic, desperate attempts at negotiation. Perhaps a few leaders would try to fight before realizing how hopeless their situation was. It always ended the same way. 3 days later, the human response arrived. Vorath opened the transmission in his throne room, surrounded by his advisors and generals. The message was short. Just 4 words appeared on the screen. "Come and take it." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Vorath began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. His advisors joined in, though some of them looked uncertain. "How delightful," Vorath said. "They have spirit. I almost feel sorry for them." "Should we send the full armada, High Executor?" one of his generals asked. Vorath waved a dismissive hand. "Why waste resources? Send the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. 40 ships will be more than enough to crush these primitives." The general hesitated. "Perhaps we should send more, just to be safe. We know very little about their military capabilities." "We know everything we need to know," Vorath replied. "They are a Class 4 civilization. They have basic space travel and energy weapons. Nothing that can threaten even our smallest warships. 40 vessels could conquer their entire species 10 times over." He turned back to the holographic display of Earth, studying the small blue world with mild curiosity. "Besides, I want to send a message to the rest of the galaxy. When we destroy them with a fraction of our strength, everyone will remember what happens to those who defy the Empire." The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet departed 3 days later under the command of Fleet Commander Kethvor. He was young and ambitious, eager to prove himself through easy victory. The journey to the human home system would take 2 weeks through slipspace. During that time, Vorath forgot about the humans entirely. He had more important matters to attend to. Border disputes with neighboring empires, trade negotiations, the endless politics of ruling 900 worlds. The humans were just another primitive species waiting to be conquered. They would submit or die. There was no third option. On Earth, the human response to the Imperial ultimatum had been carefully calculated. Admiral Chen Wei had spent 30 years preparing for this moment, not preparing for the Velanthari specifically, but preparing for the inevitable day when a hostile alien civilization would come knocking. She stood in the command center of the United Earth Defense Force, buried deep beneath a mountain in what had once been called Switzerland. Around her, hundreds of officers monitored screens, showing every corner of the solar system. "They took the bait," her intelligence chief reported. "Long-range sensors show a fleet of 40 vessels entering slipspace. Estimated arrival in 14 days. Chen nodded. "Fleet composition? 32 cruisers, 6 battleships, 2 carrier-class vessels. Standard Imperial conquest formation. Arrogant," Chen said quietly. "They could have sent everything they had. Instead, they sent just enough to feel superior." Her tactical officer, a young man named James Morrison, looked up from his console. "Admiral, should we evacuate the civilian population? If they reach Earth." "They won't reach Earth," Chen interrupted. "They won't even get past Saturn. She pulled up a display showing the true strength of human military power. Not the public fleet that everyone knew about. The 60-odd vessels that patrolled the trade routes and protected the colonies. The real fleet. The one that existed in no official records. 212 warships, hidden in shipyards carved into asteroids and moons. Ships designed in secret over the past century. Built with technologies that humanity had deliberately hidden from any watching eyes. We've been preparing for this day since we first discovered we weren't alone in the universe, Chen said. Every government on Earth agreed on one thing. When the aliens came, we would be ready. Morrison stared at the display in disbelief. He had served in the Defense Force for 10 years and had never suspected the hidden fleet existed. Why keep it secret? He asked. Because we knew someone was watching, Chen replied. Signals intelligence. Detected Velanthari observation drones in our system 50 years ago. We let them see what we wanted them to see. A weak species. Easy prey. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The Empire thinks they're coming to conquer primitives. They have no idea what's waiting for them. Across the solar system, the hidden fleet began to wake. Crews that had trained in secret for years boarded their vessels. Weapons, systems that had never been fired in combat, powered up for the first time. The Velanthari Empire had made the same mistake that so many others had made throughout human history. They had looked at humanity and seen weakness. They had seen a young species, confined to a small corner of space, with no apparent military strength. They had not looked deeper. They had not seen the centuries of war that had shaped humanity into the most efficient killers their planet had ever produced. They had not seen the paranoia that drove humans to prepare for threats that might never come. They had not seen the stubborn, defiant spirit that had allowed humanity to survive ice ages, plagues, and countless wars against themselves. The Empire was arrogant. They believed they were bringing war to a helpless victim. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Fleet Commander Kethvor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, as the fleet emerged from slip space at the edge of the human solar system. The journey had been uneventful, as expected. His officers had spent the time reviewing what little intelligence they had on the humans. It was not impressive reading. The humans had primitive energy shields, basic plasma weapons, and ships that could barely travel faster than light. Their largest warship was half the size of Kethvor's smallest cruiser. Begin scanning the system, Kethvor ordered. Find their fleet and broadcast the surrender demand. His sensor officer bent over her console, running standard scans across the solar system. I'm detecting 63 vessels, Commander. Most are clustered around the third planet. A few patrol ships scattered through the system. 63, Kethvor repeated with amusement. They barely have enough ships to offer token resistance. He straightened in his command chair, preparing to enjoy the show. Move us into attack formation. We'll destroy their fleet first, then begin orbital bombardment of their colonies. Leave the home world for last. I want them to watch everything they've built burn before they die. The Velanthari fleet began its advance into the solar system. Their formation was designed for intimidation. Ships spread wide to appear as threatening as possible. Weapon ports glowed with charged plasma, ready to unleash destruction at a moment's notice. They passed the outer planets without incident. Kethvor noted the human patrol ships fleeing before them, running back toward their home world. He smiled at the sight. Let them run. Let them tell their leaders that death was coming. Commander, his sensor officer said suddenly. I'm detecting something strange. Explain. There's a large mass behind the sixth planet's largest moon. It wasn't there a moment ago. Kethvor frowned. A mass? What kind of mass? Before she could answer, the space around the Velanthari fleet came alive with movement. Ships emerged from everywhere at once. They rose from behind moons, accelerated out of asteroid fields, and dropped from positions above and below the fleet's formation. They were human ships, but not the primitive vessels the intelligence reports had described. These ships were sleek and deadly, bristling with weapons that the Empire had never seen before, and there were so many of them. 200 contacts, the sensor officer shouted. No more than that. 212 enemy vessels. Kethvor stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The humans had been hiding ships, not just a few ships, an entire fleet. They had been watching the Velanthari approach, waiting for them to move deep into the system before springing the trap. That's impossible, he said. They're a Class 4 civilization. They can't have this many ships. They can't have hidden them from our observation drones. Commander, they're opening fire. The first human weapon struck the Eternal Dominion before Kethvor could give any orders. It wasn't a plasma lance or an energy beam. It was something far more primitive and far more terrifying. A solid projectile, a massive slug of dense metal, traveling at a fraction of the speed of light. It hit the flagship's shields and punched straight through them as if they didn't exist. The slug continued through 3 decks before finally stopping, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. What was that? Kethvor demanded as his ship shuddered around him. Kinetic weapon, Commander. They're firing solid projectiles using magnetic acceleration. Kinetic weapons. Kethvor couldn't believe what he was hearing. Kinetic weapons were primitive technology, abandoned by the Empire thousands of years ago, in favor of elegant plasma and energy systems. No civilized species still used them, but as he watched his fleet begin to die, he realized why the humans had kept using them. They worked. The human ships moved like nothing Kethvor had ever seen. They didn't form neat battle lines or follow predictable patterns. They swarmed around his fleet like insects, attacking from every direction at once. Their small, fast ships darted between his cruisers, too quick to track, firing constantly. And their large ships, the ones he had assumed were easy targets, were monsters. They absorbed hits that should have destroyed them and kept fighting. When one of them was finally damaged beyond repair, it didn't retreat. It accelerated toward the nearest Valanthari vessel and detonated its own reactor. Kethvor watched the Pride of Valanth, a 600-year-old battlecruiser, split in half by a suicide attack. They're insane, his second officer whispered. They're destroying themselves to destroy us. But that wasn't quite right, Kethvor realized. The humans weren't destroying themselves randomly. Every sacrifice was calculated. Every suicide attack took out a ship worth far more than the one lost. The humans were trading efficiently, spending their ships like currency to purchase Valanthari deaths. All ships, break formation, Kethvor ordered. We need to retreat, but the trap was already closed. The human fleet had surrounded them, cutting off every escape route. And still more human ships kept appearing, reserves that had been held back, fresh vessels joining the battle as damaged ones fell back. The battle lasted 4 hours. In that time, Kethvor watched everything he knew about warfare proven wrong. The Empire fought with protocol and precision. They targeted engines first, then weapons, then life support, giving enemies time to surrender at each stage. It was civilized. It was honorable. The humans had no protocol. They went for killing shots from the first moment. They didn't disable ships. They destroyed them utterly, leaving no survivors who might recover and fight again. They showed no mercy because mercy was not efficient. When Kethvor finally managed to break through the human lines with 9 surviving ships, he looked back at the wreckage of his fleet. 31 vessels destroyed, thousands of his people dead, all because the Empire had assumed that humans were weak. As his battered flagship limped toward slipspace, Kethvor composed a message to High Executor Vorath. It was the hardest thing he had ever written. We were wrong, the message read. The humans are not primitives. They are not a Class 4 civilization. They have been hiding their true strength from us. They have weapons we have never encountered. They have tactics we have no defense against. They fight without honor, without mercy, and without fear. He paused, staring at his words on the screen. Then he added one final line. Do not underestimate them again. They are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. The message was transmitted as Kethvor's ship entered slipspace. Behind him, the human fleet did not pursue. They simply waited, watching the survivors flee, making sure the message would reach the Empire. Admiral Chen Wei stood on her bridge, surveying the aftermath of the battle. They had lost 38 ships, far fewer than she had feared. The hidden fleet had performed beyond her highest expectations. They'll be back, Morrison said quietly. And next time they'll bring everything they have. Chen nodded. I know. That's what we're counting on. She turned to face her tactical display, which now showed the entire solar system. 3 months. That's how long her analysts estimated before the Empire could mobilize a full response. 3 months to turn their home into a fortress. 3 months to prepare for the largest battle in human history. Chen allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. The first blow had been struck. The Empire now knew that humanity would not go quietly. But this was only the beginning. High Executor Vorith read Kethvor's report 17 times. Each time, he hoped to find something different. Some mistake. Some explanation that made sense. But the words remained the same. 31 ships lost. To primitives. He stood alone in his throne room, the holographic images of burning Velanthari warships floating before him. His hands trembled with an emotion he had not felt in centuries. Rage? Yes, but something else too. Something cold and unfamiliar. Fear. How is this possible? He asked the empty room. The Empire had conquered hundreds of species. They had never lost a fleet action. Not once in 12,000 years. Their military was the most powerful force in the galaxy. Their technology was unmatched. Their warriors were bred for combat. And yet 9 ships had limped home from a battle against a species that shouldn't have been able to challenge a single cruiser. Vorith summoned his advisors. They came quickly, their faces showing the same confusion and disbelief that he felt. The news had already spread through the capital. For the first time in living memory, the Empire had suffered defeat. Explain this to me, Vorith demanded. How did this happen? Admiral Korath, the commander of the Imperial Navy, stepped forward. He was one of the oldest and most experienced officers in the Empire. Even he looked shaken. The humans deceived us, Korath said. They hid their true capabilities. Our observation drones saw only what they wanted us to see. For how long? At least 50 years, based on Kethvor's analysis. Possibly longer. They built an entire fleet in secret. Ships, weapons, training facilities, all hidden from our eyes. Vorith slammed his fist against his throne. And no one noticed? No one in 50 years thought to look closer? We had no reason to, High Executor. They appeared to be exactly what we expected. A young species, barely capable of space travel. Why would we suspect them of hiding advanced military technology? It was a fair question, and Vorith hated that he had no answer. The Empire had grown complacent. They had conquered so many weak species that they had stopped looking for strong ones. Tell me about their weapons, Vorith said. Korath activated a tactical display showing reconstructed data from the battle. Their primary weapons are kinetic accelerators. They fire solid metal projectiles at extremely high velocities. Our shields are designed to deflect energy weapons. Kinetic impacts overload them almost instantly. Then we redesign our shields. It's not that simple. The power requirements would be enormous, and their ships are also faster and more maneuverable than ours. They use a different engine design that we don't fully understand yet. Vorith studied the display, watching the human ships swarm around the Velanthari formation. Their movements were chaotic, unpredictable. His own ships looked slow and clumsy by comparison. What about their tactics? He asked. Aggressive. Extremely aggressive. Korath pulled up another recording, showing a damaged human ship accelerating toward a Velanthari cruiser. They use suicide attacks as a standard tactic. When a ship is badly damaged, the crew crashes it into the nearest enemy vessel. They trade their lives to kill us. That's insane. Yes, but it's effective. Our crews are trained to retreat when damaged. Theirs are trained to die fighting. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. The Empire valued life, at least the lives of its own citizens. The idea of deliberately sacrificing ships and crews was alien to their thinking, but the humans did it without hesitation. They fought as if death meant nothing to them, as if victory was worth any price. We need more information, Vorith said finally. I want to know everything about these humans, their history, their culture, their psychology. How did they become like this? One of his intelligence officers stepped forward. We've been analyzing their public broadcasts, High Executor. Their history is unusual. Show me. The display changed to show images from human history. Wars. Endless wars. Humans fighting each other with every weapon imaginable. Swords and spears gave way to guns and bombs. Then came weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash. They have been at war with themselves since the beginning of their civilization, the intelligence officer explained. They developed weapons of mass destruction while still confined to a single planet. They came close to destroying themselves, multiple times. And yet they survived. More than survived. They thrived. Every war made them stronger. Every conflict improved their weapons and tactics. By the time they reached space, they had thousands of years of military experience. Vorath watched the images scroll past. Battles that killed millions. Wars that lasted decades. Humans dying in trenches, in cities, in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. They fought over land, over resources, over ideas. Sometimes they seemed to fight for no reason at all. They're monsters, someone whispered. No, Vorath said slowly. They're survivors. Everything in their history tried to kill them, including each other, and they're still here. That makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. He turned to face his advisors, his mind made up. We cannot allow them to exist. A species this violent, this resilient, this unpredictable. If we don't destroy them now, they will eventually destroy us. What do you suggest, High Executor? The Grand Armada. Every ship we have. I don't care if it takes years to assemble. We will descend on their world with such overwhelming force that nothing they can do will matter. Admiral Korath hesitated. The Grand Armada hasn't been mobilized in 3,000 years. It would leave our borders undefended. Our borders don't matter if we let these humans grow stronger. Look at what they did with 300 years of space travel. Imagine what they'll do with 3,000. Imagine what they'll do if they ever decide to expand beyond their little corner of space. The room fell silent again. Every advisor imagined the same thing. Human fleets spreading across the galaxy. Human weapons turned against the Empire. Human aggression unleashed on a scale the universe had never seen. You have your orders, Vorath said. Begin mobilization immediately. I want the Grand Armada ready to move in 3 months. As his advisors filed out to begin preparations, Vorath turned back to the display showing Earth. Such a small world. Such an ordinary star. Who would have thought that something so dangerous could come from such an unremarkable place? You surprised us, Vorath said to the image. I will give you credit for that. You are the first species in 12,000 years to make the Empire bleed. But you have made a terrible mistake. He closed his fist, and the holographic Earth flickered and died. You showed us what you are, and now we know to be afraid of you. Fear makes us careful. Fear makes us thorough. When the Grand Armada arrives at your world, there will be no tricks left to save you. There will be no hidden ships. There will only be fire and death and the end of your species. He turned and walked toward the door. Enjoy your victory, humans. It will be your last. But even as he said the words, a small voice in the back of his mind wondered if he was right. The humans had surprised the Empire once. What else might they be hiding? Vorath pushed the thought away. It didn't matter. 4,000 ships would be enough to destroy anything. No species could stand against the full might of the Velenthari Empire. He was sure of it. Almost sure. Senator Valethra was the oldest living member of the Imperial Senate. She had been born before the Empire conquered her own species, the Kesari, nearly 8,000 years ago. She remembered what it was like to be on the other side of an Imperial ultimatum. Most days, she sat silently in her seat, watching the younger senators argue about trade routes and tax policies. She had stopped caring about such things centuries ago. The Empire would continue as it always had, absorbing species, expanding slowly, maintaining order. Nothing ever really changed. Until now, she requested a private audience with High Executor Vorath 3 days after the news of the human victory arrived. He agreed to see her, though she could tell he was surprised. She had not spoken to anyone in over a century. They met in his private chambers, away from the spies and politicians that infested the throne room. Vorath looked tired. The defeat had aged him visibly. Senator Valethra, he said, to what do I owe this honor? I have come to warn you, she replied. You are making a mistake. Vorath's eyes narrowed. The Grand Armada is not a mistake. It is a necessity. The Grand Armada is not the mistake I'm speaking of. Velethra moved slowly to a chair and sat down, her ancient bones protesting every movement. Your mistake is assuming that more ships will solve the problem. 4,000 vessels against a few hundred. The math is simple. Math means nothing when you don't understand your enemy. Velethra activated the display screen on the wall, showing the same human history files that Vorath had already studied. I have spent the last 3 days doing nothing but learning about these humans. What I found terrifies me. I've seen the files. They're violent. We knew that already. You've seen the violence. You haven't understood what it means." Velethra scrolled through the images until she found what she was looking for. A small force of human warriors standing in a narrow pass, facing an army thousands of times their size. This battle happened over 4,000 years ago. By their counting, 300 warriors against an army of hundreds of thousands. They knew they would die. They fought anyway. They held that pass for 3 days before they were finally overwhelmed. Impressive, but ultimately pointless. They all died. Yes, and their deaths became a legend. A story that inspired their entire species for millennia. The humans don't measure victory the same way we do. They celebrate defeats that should have broken them. They turn losses into motivation. Vorath shook his head. Pretty stories won't stop plasma fire. No, but what happened after those stories might. Velethra changed the display again, showing a massive human conflict from their recent history. This war killed 60 million of them. 60 million. And do you know what happened when it ended? They rebuilt. They became stronger. The technologies developed during that war transformed their civilization. They went from primitive ground vehicles to landing on their moon in less than 30 years. Every time they almost destroy themselves, they learn and adapt. War doesn't weaken them. It forces them to evolve. Vorath was silent for a moment. What are you suggesting? That we shouldn't attack them at all? I'm suggesting that attacking them might be exactly what makes them most dangerous. Think about what you're doing. You're sending the largest fleet in Imperial history to threaten their existence. You're giving them exactly the kind of challenge that has always made them stronger. So we should just let them go? After they destroyed our fleet? I'm not saying that either. Velethra leaned forward, her ancient eyes intense. I'm saying you need to understand what you're really fighting. These aren't just aliens with good weapons. They're a species that has been forged by endless conflict. Every weapon they have was designed to kill other humans. Every tactic was developed through centuries of war against themselves. She pulled up one final image. A human standing on a ruined battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of other humans. The figure was wounded, exhausted, but still standing, still fighting. We've conquered species that surrender when they see they can't win. We've conquered species that value peace over survival. We've conquered species that give up when the odds turn against them. Velethra turned to face Vorath directly. Humans are none of those things. They fight to the last. They never surrender. And when they're backed into a corner, they become more dangerous, not less. Vorath stood and walked to the window, looking out at the capital city below. Millions of Velenthari went about their daily lives, unaware of the threat that had emerged from a small blue world on the far side of the galaxy. Then what would you have me do? He asked. If attacking makes them stronger and ignoring them lets them grow, what option is left? I don't know. Velethra admitted. Perhaps there is no good option. Perhaps we should have left them alone from the beginning. But we didn't. We knocked on their door and showed them we were a threat. Now they know we exist. Now they have a reason to point their violence outward instead of at each other. You think they'll come for us? Even if we don't attack? I think they'll prepare for us to attack. And if we do attack, and we somehow fail. She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. We won't fail. 4,000 ships is more than enough. You sound very certain. I am certain. Velethra rose slowly from her chair. I hope you're right, High Executor. I truly do. But I remember what it felt like when the Empire came for my people. We thought we could fight. We thought our spirit would be enough. It wasn't. She walked toward the door, then paused. The difference is, we learned to submit. We accepted our place in the Empire. I don't think the humans are capable of that. I don't think surrender exists in their minds. If you corner them, they won't kneel. They'll fight until every last one of them is dead. Then we'll kill every last one of them. Perhaps. But how many of us will die first? How many worlds will burn before it's over? Are you prepared for that cost? Vorath didn't answer. Velethra nodded slowly and left the room. For a long time after she was gone, Vorath stood at the window, thinking. The Grand Armada was already assembling. Ships were arriving from every corner of the Empire. In 3 months, the largest military force in galactic history would be ready to move against a single species, on a single world. It should have felt like overwhelming power. It should have felt like certain victory. Instead, Vorath felt the cold touch of doubt. The humans had already surprised the Empire once. They had hidden their strength for decades, waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal it. What else might they be hiding? He pushed the doubt away. It didn't matter. Whatever tricks the humans had left, they couldn't stand against 4,000 warships. No one could. The Grand Armada would crush them. The human species would be erased from existence. The Empire would continue as it always had. Everything would be fine. Vorath kept telling himself that over the following weeks. He kept telling himself that as reports came in of human activity in their home system. He kept telling himself that as his intelligence officers struggled to determine what the humans were building. He kept telling himself that right up until the day the Grand Armada arrived at Earth. And then he stopped telling himself anything, because the truth was finally clear. The Empire had made a terrible mistake. The Grand Armada emerged from slipspace at the edge of the Sol system on a Tuesday afternoon. Earth time. 4,000 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, spread across millions of kilometers of space. Their combined firepower could have sterilized 100 worlds. High Executor Vorath watched from the bridge of his personal flagship, the Eternal Conquest. This time, he had come personally. This time, there would be no mistakes. Begin scanning, he ordered. Show me what they've built. The sensor display activated, and Vorath felt his confidence begin to crack. The solar system had been transformed. Weapons, platforms orbited every planet and moon, thousands of them, each bristling with the same kinetic accelerators that had torn apart the Third Fleet. Asteroid fields had been rearranged into dense minefields. The gas giants were surrounded by defensive stations that could engage targets millions of kilometers away. And at the center of it all, arranged in a formation around Earth itself, waited the Terran combined fleet. Count them, Vorath said quietly. Over 1,000 confirmed contacts, High Executor, and more appearing every minute. 1,000 ships. In 3 months, the humans had more than quadrupled their fleet. It should have been impossible. No species could build that many vessels in such a short time, but the humans had done it. Factories that had produced civilian goods had been converted to military production overnight. Mining ships had become weapons platforms. Transport vessels had been retrofitted with armor and guns. Every human who could hold a tool had worked day and night to prepare for this moment. Vorath stared at the display, trying to calculate the odds. His fleet still outnumbered theirs 4-1. But after what happened to the Third Fleet, numbers meant less than they should have. A transmission arrived from the human fleet. Vorath accepted it, and the face of Admiral Chen Wei appeared on his screen. She looked calm, confident, not like someone facing destruction, but like someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "We know what you are," Chen said. "An empire built on the idea that strength gives you the right to take whatever you want. You've been doing this for 12,000 years. You've never met a species that could stop you." She paused, and something cold entered her eyes. "We are humanity. We have been fighting since before we had words to describe what fighting meant. We have killed our gods, split the atom, and broken the laws of physics to serve our will. We turned our weapons on ourselves for so long that when we finally pointed them outward, we had become something the galaxy has never seen." Behind her, the Terran fleet began to move. Not defensively, not cautiously. They were advancing. "You came here to destroy us," Chen continued. "But we are not the species you destroy. We are the species that ends empires. We are the nightmare you didn't know you should have feared." She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something almost like a whisper. "And we are done being polite." The transmission ended. The Terran fleet opened fire. The battle that followed would be remembered for centuries. The Velanthari had numbers. The humans had fury. Human ships crashed into the Grand Armada like a wave hitting a cliff. They didn't fight in formation. They didn't follow rules. Each ship found its own targets and attacked until it was destroyed or victorious. When damaged, they didn't retreat. They accelerated toward the nearest enemy and used their dying vessels as weapons. The kinetic accelerators punched through Velanthari shields with brutal efficiency. Ships that had served the Empire for centuries were torn apart in seconds. The elegant plasma lances of the Imperial fleet, designed for civilized warfare, seemed almost useless against enemies who refused to stop advancing. Vorath watched his tactical display fill with the red markers of destroyed ships. His own vessels were fighting back, killing human ships by the dozens. But for every human vessel that fell, another took its place. And every Velanthari ship lost was irreplaceable. They're insane, his tactical officer whispered. They're throwing away ships like they mean nothing. Every ship means something, Vorath replied grimly. They're just willing to pay the price. The battle raged for 18 hours. Both fleets took horrific casualties. The space between Earth and Mars became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. But slowly, inevitably, the tide turned. The Velanthari fleet was not designed for this kind of warfare. Their crews were trained for conquest, not survival. When ships were damaged, captains looked for ways to retreat. When formations broke down, officers didn't know how to adapt. The humans had no such problems. They fought as if death was just another tactic. Their damaged ships rammed into enemy vessels. Their escape pods were fitted with explosives. Even their wounded crews found ways to keep fighting until the very end. By the 19th hour, the Grand Armada had lost half its ships. Vorath gave the order to retreat, but the humans didn't let them go easily. They pursued the fleeing Velanthari fleet to the edge of the solar system, picking off damaged ships one by one. By the time the survivors finally escaped into slipspace, fewer than 800 vessels remained from the original 4,000. On the bridge of the TFS Defiance, Admiral Chen Wei allowed herself to breathe for the first time in hours. They had done it. Against all odds, against the largest military force in the galaxy, humanity had won. The cost had been enormous. Over 600 human ships destroyed. Tens of thousands of lives lost. The defensive platforms around the outer planets were gone. The minefields had been swept away, but Earth stood. Humanity survived, and the Velanthari Empire had learned a lesson it would never forget. The war continued for another 18 months. The Empire tried twice more to assault the Sol system, and twice more they were driven back. Human ships began striking at Imperial territory, raiding supply lines, destroying outposts. The empire that had never known defeat was bleeding from 1,000 wounds. In the end, it was the Velanthari who asked for peace. High Executor Vorath stood before the human delegation, his pride in ruins. He expected demands for territory, for tribute, for punishment. He expected to be treated the way the Empire had always treated those it defeated. Instead, the human ambassador smiled and offered him a treaty of mutual respect. "We don't want your worlds," she said. "We don't want your resources. We don't want to rule you." Vorath didn't understand. "Then what do you want?" "We want you to remember. The next time someone in your empire thinks about attacking another species, we want them to remember what happened here. We want them to remember that the galaxy is full of surprises, and we want them to remember what happens when you underestimate the species on the other end of your ultimatum." The treaty was signed 1 week later. The Velanthari Empire and the Terran Federation became trading partners. Human ships began appearing in imperial space, not as invaders, but as merchants and explorers. And across the galaxy, other species heard the story of what had happened. A young species, barely 3 centuries into space travel, had defeated the greatest military power the stars had ever known. They had won not through numbers or technology, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Other empires looked at their own tributary species and wondered, what else might be hiding in the quiet corners of their territory? What other primitives might be more dangerous than they appeared? For the first time in 12,000 years, the strong began to fear the weak, and on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, humanity continued as it always had, building, creating, preparing. They had no desire to conquer the galaxy, but they had made one thing absolutely clear. They would never be conquered themselves. The universe had finally met humanity, and the universe would never be the same again.